Buenos dias, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who are joining us today at this Spain student housing market webinar. My name is Stefan Kolliver, and I'm pleased to see you all joining us today. We will start very shortly, just a few housekeeping notes before we go there. Again, my pleasure to welcome you all. For those of you who have not joined us for our previous webinars, I will just share that after summer, BONARD continues with a series of market webinars, following our webinars on Nordics and the UK market, as well as a series of roundtables that we recently organized at Expo Real last week. Today, we continue with a focused look at the Spain student housing market. Well, one of the most sought after markets recently. My pleasure to welcome and introduce our Spain student housing market expert, David Navarro. Before I give the floor to him, just a couple of notes. The webinar will take approximately 30 minutes. And we encourage you all to leave your questions in the Q&A section of this Zoom webinar. The questions will be followed up by our team in written after the webinar. So welcome again. I think we have already a very decent number of attendees in the online crowd and now in the online audience. And now the word over to David.
Thank you, Stefan. Well, first, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all joining today. I'd like to firstly thank you all for joining, taking the time from your busy schedules, your busy agendas. We appreciate your engagement, your participation. It's my pleasure to be presenting today the trends and data on the Spanish market for student housing. Couple of notes as well. Feel free, I would encourage to ask any questions in the section for questions. Regarding the presentation, we'll be gladly sharing it after we finalize the deck, and the presentation should take roughly around 30 minutes. So I really do hope that the insights, the data that will be presented today will be insightful and meaningful for your understanding, not only just of the market, but for your strategies and your activities within the sector. So for those who don't know us, us at BONARD, we're not just a data firm, we're much more than that. So data is one of our core products, but it's not the only one. We are providing as well different types of market and feasibility reports with the commercial due diligences, financial modeling. So this is based on our experience and our exposure in the local markets. Our track record of almost 2 decades within the sector has proven to be quite decisive, and it's made us pretty much the go-to address for student housing. So on screen, what we are looking at now is just a couple of the products and services that we can offer. We have our data platform, which is really fast access to our in-house data. It will allow you to very precisely understand markets, to be able to work with the data, but not just only for the sake of working with the data, to be able to have more strategically informed decisions based on this. This is based as well on our elaboration over years to create a product that would service all of your needs. On the left-hand side, we have a couple of examples of the types of studies that we regularly execute. This is basically our bread and butter. So please feel free to reach out to us. You have the two contact us sections, so feel free to drop us an email or give us a call. We'd be more than happy to have a discussion with you. So here are a couple of the clients that we've been able to service and have close cooperation with over the course of the years. Like I mentioned, it's been 2 decades already, and we are not only working alongside some of the more experienced or tenured players, but also with the newcomers. We work with everyone ranging from the investors down to developers and operators looking to acquire different kinds of products or actors within the sector. Good. So without further ado, let's jump in already. Let's have a look into Spain. My pleasure to present the data and the insights. So what are we looking at here? Right. So we're looking at the data. regarding student demand. So according to it, and as we've displayed in the graph, we can observe Spain is experiencing a positive, stable growth for students in the country. So there's around a 2% increase of total students over the past 6 years. It's a total population of students of around 2 million students. Now, what is important to remark based on this graph is the growth in international student population. There's been an almost 8% increase over the past couple of years, right? So the share of international students is growing. They are choosing Spain as a study destination for various reasons, right? So in terms of as we can see on the right hand table with bubbles, the international student share in terms of the total students has increased from a 9 to an 11%. So overall, we can say that Spain represents one of the European countries which has experienced and will continue experiencing stable increase over the years, not just in terms of the students, but attractiveness, educational program, but international students especially. A little bit of soft intel. This is for awareness. Why? Because it's good to understand what's going on as well in the market that will help drive student demand over the next couple of years. So the Spanish government is implementing a fast track pathway. It's called EduBridge to Spain. This will, in essence, allow foreign students that have been hindered in a way with US visa restrictions. They will be able now to continue or start their studies in Spain. So the Spanish Migration Policy Analytical Center, in fact, predicts around a 5 to 7% increase in the number of international students over the next 2 years. Right. Let's have a look at Erasmus students in Spain. So over the years, we've seen that Spain has become increasingly attractive destination for international students, especially Erasmus ones. The average estimated growth for Erasmus students from 2023 compared to 2022 is a 6.8 year-on-year growth. So if we look at the numbers of Erasmus students in each bubble, we can see that Spain, in fact, has the highest number of students from Erasmus compared to Germany, France, and Italy. Right. To further complement the previous slide, and basically to emphasize the attractiveness of Spain for a country, not just for Erasmus and for international students, but as a destination that has a lot to offer, right? We included graphs of different cities. This is to understand the popularity, but also to benchmark them across different student city hubs in Europe. Now, if we look closely at the graph, when comparing the Spanish cities with the other student city hubs, what we see is that Madrid and Barcelona are the most popular ones from all, right? This is a pool from the cities and students that we've taken and collected to understand a little bit more the growth, right? So each one, Madrid and Barcelona, have almost around 5,000 students, each within the period of 2022 and 2023. The next destinations are as well Greater Paris, Rome, Milan, but Valencia has been growing over the past couple of years. It's quite surprising to see that this is now the case. And what, as mentioned, what we can see from these graphs is that Spain remains and will continue to be a very attractive destination for international students and for Erasmus students. Now, let's talk a little bit more about English taught programs, the educational aspect of that influences student housing and the demand, right? So within this slide, what we are covering are the English taught programs in different educational levels. As we can see, we're taking into consideration undergraduate, master's, and doctor's studies. Now, we're taking into consideration full and part-time students. We're taking into consideration on-site and blended, which is not pure online. So it's for as well for all degree types. Now, what is important to highlight in this graph are the following points. Is the first one, I think the most important one, is that Spain leads in English taught programs for undergraduate or bachelor's programs. So it has the highest number of English taught undergraduate programs amongst the countries we are showing here: Netherlands, Germany, Italy, France, and Portugal. So what does it mean? Well, this indicates a strong internationalization efforts at the bachelor's level. So this is possibly aimed at attracting more international students. Now, despite its leading in undergraduate levels, Spain, when talking about master's degrees, is not as high as other countries. It's much more lower than the Netherlands, than Germany and Italy. However, this is a potential, it's an opportunity for growth. So Spain shows this potential for growth, especially at the master's level. The strong undergraduate base could really serve as a pipeline for students that are willing and want to stay to have English taught graduate studies. So increasing the number of master's programs in English could really make Spain much more competitive when attracting international students. Now, let's start a little bit focusing on the data regarding supply. This is for student housing in Spain. Now, the data is according to our in-house coverage of the country. We have 15 cities tracked. And like I said, the data that we will be focusing on now for this is related to the in-house coverage that we have. So currently, there are around almost 81,000 operational beds in Spain. This is distributed among 352 PBSA assets. Now, we are considering both public and private stock. So from this number, 70% of the beds represent private beds, which is a considerable number. So basically, the majority of the beds that are in the markets, the 15 markets that we track, are private beds. Now, the net provision rate. So this shows that within the second square, we're referring to the distribution of the PBSA beds between domestic mobile plus international students. It's a 16%, as we can see. The private provision rate, we're talking about the private PBSA beds for domestic mobile plus international students, which is around an 11%. Now, as a total provision rate, we are referring to or considering the PBSA beds available for all students is an 8% among the 15 cities that we track in Spain. Now, beds in pipeline, it's very important to as well acknowledge the growing market, that there's more beds, there's more interest, there's more students coming into the market. So at the moment, we're tracking around 16,165 beds. Then the pipeline, they will be introduced to the market as of October this year. The majority consisting of private beds. It's around 64% of them will be opening until 2028. So the takeaway from this slide is to note really the undersupply overall in the market. What we see is that the supply is not really keeping up with the increasing demand, as we saw in the first slides. Now, to understand a little bit the competitive landscape in Spain, let's look at the market share of private beds per operator, which is distributed amongst the 15 cities we're tracking. So more than half of the private PBSA beds are from 5 providers. So we can see within the pie chart the distribution of assigned the percentage and the main players. So Resa, Livenza, and Mi Campus are the 3 main providers. They actually represent 37% of the market share for PBSA bed supply in 2025. Now, each has a double-digit market share. Now, overall, across 15 cities, we're tracking 42 portfolio brands, 160 private providers, 352 operational assets, of which 70% of all the stock of beds is the total supply covered by private operators. It should amount to around 57,000 beds. Now, let's speak in terms of provision rate or saturation of markets. Quite important when deciding what cities are interesting, viable, and have potential for growth over the next couple of years. So this graph really highlights a strong geographical difference when speaking or referring to the net provision rate. So on the vertical axis, we see the percentage, and on the horizontal axis, we see the student population in thousands, right? So the national average Spanish net provision rate that we're considering is around the 16%. Now, some of the key insights that we can perceive from looking at the graph and looking at the geographies, the Spanish cities, the smaller cities are higher, the larger ones. So cities like Valladolid, Salamanca, Pamplona, San Sebastián show well above average of the average net provision rate, despite having smaller student populations. Now, this can be attributed to the low supply and stock within these cities. The major university hubs, Barcelona, Valencia, Granada, all have larger student populations, but lower provision rates. Now, these are several below, are underneath the 16%, right? So this, what it indicates to us is that demand is outpacing the supply in the larger urban centers. So the average that we're considering here, the 16%, divides the cities clearly. So about half of the cities fall below the average, Valencia, Barcelona, Granada, Murcia, Oviedo, while the others exceed it substantially. So this helps us understand or suggest that there is really a regional imbalance and hence the need for introducing more beds in pipeline over the course of next years. Now, focusing further on the pipeline, right? So as we can see within this graph, there's a depiction of the pipeline within the city. So there has been a significant increase in beds introduced into the Spanish market since 2019. The 2 years with the highest number of beds introduced were 2022 and 2024. It amounts to around 16.5 thousand beds between those 2 years. Now, this is roughly close to the amount of beds that will be introduced over the next 4 years when looking at the timeline until 2028, as we saw in the previous slide. So this is around 16.1 thousand beds. Now, a noteworthy mention is that 60% of all the planned developments that will be coming are concentrated in Barcelona, Madrid, and Valencia. Now, this next slide will showcase the evolution of the product quality in PBSA when we're referring specifically to amenities, so the offerings within the private schemes versus the rents that are charged. So over the years, we have noticed a change in amenities compared to old stocks with new stocks. So this results obviously in a higher quality, amenity-rich product that we can see in the private PBSA over the Spanish cities. Now, there is indeed a difference in rent in terms of product versus the offering. So the more amenities, the more rich you are in amenities, the higher the rent. This is a clearly observable correlation between the rents you can achieve versus the product offering, like mentioned in terms of the amenities. So within the graph on the left, we can see the green arrows pointing up. They indicate an increase percentage points of these specific types of amenities. This is the growth for individual ones. It's considered as well in the total percentage. So as we can see, there's 4 categories that have significantly grown over the years. But what we can also understand from this evolution, from this graph, is that in Spain, the assets are quite rich in amenities, which is one of the reasons why people are more interested and attractive to consider a PBSA scheme for their studies while residing or going to Spain as a destination, right? Now, on the right graph, what we're seeing is the average adjusted rents that you can basically charge for single studios in relation to the number of amenities offered within the properties. So the average rent for a lower quality and a less amenity PBSA is around 20% lower than those that have a higher quality offering, right? So this chart and these graphs are quite interesting to understand how the product over the course of years has been evolving, adjusting to suit not just the needs of the market, but the needs of the tenants, which are quite diverse when looking at different kinds of geographies and comparing them. Now, this slide will help us understand the pace of growth of rents versus inflation and of rents versus disposable income. Now, as we can see on the left-hand side, and it's important to emphasize that the rental growth is higher than inflation, but it's still lower than the disposable income, which is the graph on the right-hand side. So this helps us understand and helps support the case that rents within private PBSA studios, specifically when referring to, are still relatively affordable compared to the private rental market. That's a good sector, hence to continue investing and developing and to be growing basically over the course of the next years. As we see in the graphs, it's the numbers do not really lie. So it's a very will continue to be a very attractive market. Now, further to understand the previous slide, we decided to cover the rental dynamics in 3 selected cities, right? So we took Madrid, Barcelona, and Valencia. We wanted to depict the rental dynamics, the growth compared to the inflation over the course of years. Again, to prove the case that the average student housing rental growth has consistently outpaced inflation. So Madrid, since 2022, has seen a yearly rental growth at a moderate pace, around the 4% average. Barcelona is pretty much the only city with a reduction in the yearly increase of rent since 2024, sorry, but still remains higher than the inflation. Now, Valencia is a city that has experienced the highest rental growth average since 2020 until 2024. It also has the highest rental growth in a single year, with a spike to 8.7% in 2024 alone. So this is almost double than the previous year. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the trends, the rents in private PBSA versus the private rental market. So the ratio difference between the rents in PBSA studios versus the private rental market, PRM, as we can see, Madrid on average has around the 20% higher price than the PRM, but it's slowly leveling. It's slowly being on the same pricing. So the single studies in private student housing schemes in Barcelona since 2023 have been below the increase in rents of private rental markets. There's around a 4% difference in 2023 and a 10% difference in 2024. Valencia shows sign of consistent rental growth for PBSA. The PRM is higher in terms of rent increases versus PBSA. So with 30% lower in 2022, 23% difference in 2023, and the 15% difference in 2024. So as we can see, it still focuses and mentions or hints that there is still quite affordable options, and that the private rental market in some cities is still higher than the private studios within PBSA. Now, as we saw in the slide referring to amenities, newer assets, besides having a larger number of amenities, what we'll be showcasing in this slide is that how in most cases, newer assets command higher rents. So Madrid, there are several metrics as to why the rent hasn't really changed that increase. So location plays a role, providers in the area as well, but a little bit of a soft intelligence that I'd like to share regarding this. So in Madrid, the PBSA market is relatively new compared to other cities. So for instance, the average construction year of the residence is older than 8 years in 2014. So this suggests that most residences are of good quality. This helps explain as well the higher rental prices across the years. Now, in contrast, Valencia, the average construction year for residents older than 8 years is 2001, while in Barcelona it is 2011. So there's a strong observable correlation in Barcelona and Valencia regarding the age of stock and the rental levels. Whilst in Madrid is not really the case, however, we do see these increases across the different geographies, right? So again, the newer the assets, the higher the rents. So this is also with the premium standout outliers. Now, in this slide, let's have a look at PBSA transactions, as there are signs of increasing transactional activity across Europe. So in Q2 of 2025, this was this timeline that saw the largest volume of PBSA transactions in both the UK and continental Europe combined. This was since Q1 2023. What we can see in the graph is that continental Europe represents the largest portion of the share when referring to transactional volume. Now, Q4 2024 is the second instance where continental Europe saw the highest volume of PBSA transactions versus the UK. Now, on the right side, the square, what is showing us is the largest recent Spanish Iberian transactions or portfolio transactions that happened in 2024 and 2025. So the observable trend is that over the quarters in previous years, volume of PBSA transactions in continental Europe is growing, and it is certainly now higher than in the UK. So this demonstrates maturity in the market, in the portfolios, and in the sector. So as a result, there is an increased interest in it. Therefore, this is why we believe that the sector continues to evolve. It's now transcending, and it's quite important to keep an eye out for the different markets because, again, like we see in terms of volumes of transactions, there is a clear growth pattern and increasing transaction volumes. Now, just quickly to finalize as well, a little bit of the information regarding BONARD and what we do. So we're independent, trusted, and global advisors. We're compliant with all the industry certificates. We cover at the moment more than 300 markets, more than 2,600,000 beds. This is spread out around 15,000 assets, more than 1,000 projects under our belt. This helps us understand quite well the dynamics, to understand the product, to understand the markets. Company has grown. We are now 90 specialists, and we're distributed amongst 4 offices located in different geographies. So on my side, I would like to once again thank you all for the time, for joining the webinar. It was a pleasure to run you through our data. I hope that you found value in our insights. I've been more than happy to connect individually with anyone who would be interested in having a chat and a conversation with me to learn a little bit more about the Spanish market. We'd be more than pleased and delighted to be able to assist you in your ventures within the market. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for truly insightful presentation. There have been already a few questions asked and answered in the Q&A section. There's a few more coming in, which we'll follow up on later today or tomorrow after the webinar. Before we all disconnect, and I'm pleased to say that we have almost 200 people in the audience today, so thank you for your interest. So before we disconnect, as you can see on your screen, we organize property tours, as some of you may know, in selected markets across the globe. And the next one will be directly in Spain. It's going to be 2 night stop in Madrid and Valencia, visiting basically 4 assets in each city, starting with the dinner on October 21st. We still have a few places left, so if you're interested to get a bit more practical experience, knowledge directly from the field, to combine it with your data and insight that you might already have about the market, feel free to give us a shout, either at data@bonard.com or visit the web page related to the property tour, bonard.com/Spain, and you can find more details there. Again, thank you very much for all your questions coming in. Our team will follow up on that shortly, as well as for your attention today. And we'll be back with more webinars on selected markets across the globe soon. So please stay tuned. Thank you for your time today. Have a good one.